In this part of our conversation about using the process Enneagram as a path of transformation, we're now talking about the process of waking up. Now we're talking about the process Enneagram in its full force, using the combination of the law of 3 and the law of 7, so that those 3 points, 3, 6, and 9, create conscious shocks of energy to keep us moving along in that path of transformation. And so we first turn to point 1 in this process, aspiration and renunciation. This is tuning into our deepest aspiration of aligning with reality as it is. And we renounce ignorance for the sake of everyone, for the sake of all beings. We allow a flexible wisdom to be our guide. So at the point 1, so you may recall in the process Enneagram teachings generally, I use the terms intending and impressing with respect to the point 1. This is the point at which when we're trying to wake up, trying to transform, we get in touch with our deepest aspiration. We try to align ourselves not so much with these core beliefs or core values, but with reality as it is. We want to try to get in sync with the natural flow of reality. And this is what creates true freedom. It turns out that it feels really difficult because we're surrendering the sense of control that we have. But that sense of control that we have is a pseudo-freedom. That's the constriction of the point 1 in the sleepy automaticity Enneagram. This is the ways in which we think we're making all these free choices, but in fact, we're running our conditioned patterns. We're running on automatic. So again, using the example of the type 6, at point 1 in the waking up Enneagram, some aspirations that I might have as a 6 are to find security without supports, find security that's not dependent on a phenomena that is inherently insecure, all things that are coming and going in life, finding that inner sense of confidence and security, and also then being able to project that confidence outward, flowing in with the community and the group without necessarily suspicion or worry or insecurity about being harmed or excluded. So that might be an aspiration. And what I'm going to maybe renounce is this pattern of interrogating others. I'm going to start to see, when am I moving into interrogating others? That's just one example, because we start to use the personality Enneagram diagnostic to create these goals that we can start to be mindful of in our process of transformation. And so the personality Enneagram becomes a resource, which is something I've put it at point 2, but it can be between 1 and 2, this idea of resourcing ourselves with teachings so that we can convert those resources into goals, into aspirations that we can actually use in this process of transformation. And so my reference to resourcing brings us into point 2 of the Waking Up Enneagram, which I've titled Resourcing and Flowing, harnessing and embodying the powerful examples and the protection of our spiritual friends. These are our spiritual teachers and our friends and companions on the path. And we start expressing our authentic and vulnerable self in the natural flow of things. So the point 2 in all of us is what's trying to run these images of ourself, and the type 2 in particular runs these images and is concerned about these images. But what's happening is that now we're going to be committed to not running these images. We're going to try to be vulnerable and real and authentic in every situation. And that authenticity is going to be paired with these goals and aspirations that we put at the point 1. And this is also the point at which we find teachers and teachings. These are things within our own tradition, maybe therapists and spiritual guides and ministers and colleagues, monks and nuns, whatever, that are teachers in academic institutions, people who can really mentor us. We want to start to see their example. We want to start to live into their energy and feel the transmission of their wisdom and embody that wisdom. And with humility, accept their teachings. And this is the issue for the point 2 in all of us, is that pride of, no, I can do it on my own, I don't need any help, is now, for the point 2 in all of us, in the Waking Up Enneagram, a point of humility, a point of accepting teachings and assistance. And so I don't have specific examples to share of type 6s, how they might resource and relate, but I'm making the point again that we want to accept and model our teachers and teachings with humility. We want to relate to others with our authentic self. I can say in my own journey, I've certainly had a number of teachers and mentors who are very dear to me, and I've been very blessed to follow their example as best as I'm able and to internalize their teachings. And so at point 3 in the Waking Up Enneagram, we have the infusion of our first conscious shock. This is the first shock point, called conscious labor. What this is referring to is that we have a role to play in our own transformation. We must participate consciously and with great awareness. And what we're essentially doing at point 3 is we are doing non-doing. We are doing the not doing of our type pattern. We are doing the relaxation of our type pattern. So in our normal situation, we're feeling that vulnerability that we're committed to at point 2, and all of a sudden a real situation arises and we are tempted to run that type pattern. Boy, it really wants to move into that interrogation that I've aspired to set aside. And what I'm having to do is to relax that type pattern. The way we do this is through our spiritual methods and our psychological methods. Whatever those teachings are that you've bound yourself to at point 2 are the teachings you want to bring in. So deep prayer or meditation or chants or devotional practices or whatever that you can do in that moment to relax the running of the type pattern. Bring the attention in and down and underneath those urges to just go on automatic and to get a sense of harmonizing head, heart, and gut. And this is why point 3 conscious labor I call harmonizing the breath of life, the subtle energy in our body with a steady attention. And by doing so, we unify the energy of our 3 centers into a malleable, alert openness, which is larger than the type patterns. So what's going on is through these practices, whatever they may be, and we can experiment with them, we're trying to bring ourselves into alignment. We're trying to harmonize the 3 centers. And in doing so, we create an energy field and a sense of awareness that is much bigger than our personality pattern. In that larger awareness, that relaxed sense outside of the patterns, which is really always there, it's just something to be tuned into, we can then work with seeing the type pattern and letting it dissolve and reclaiming its energy. And so that's what's going on at the point 3 in all of us. And so here in the type 6 example, I've got my Bitmoji self doing a vision quest. I've actually never done a vision quest. It might be kind of cool to try it sometime, but this was a spiritual practice I could find in the Bitmoji menu. The point is that we're using our spiritual practices, whatever's resonating with our hearts and within our tradition and our teachers, to find that sense of spaciousness, that sense of alignment, and allow these patterns to be seen more clearly in a larger space of loving awareness. And so at point 4 in the Waking Up Enneagram, we start to deepen into subtlety. This is when we start to open to the actual non-dramatized feelings and suffering within ourselves and with other people, and we absorb into an authentic, subtle experience, formerly disowned and shadowed, now seen more objectively. This is the point at which we're starting to see our shadows. We're starting to feel our true feelings underneath the running of these type patterns, or the true sensations in our bodies. And we're starting to really tune into the suffering we're causing other people. We're starting to actually take that into account and bring that into our experience. And so these formerly disowned shadows, our light shadows and dark shadows, start to be seen when we don't run on automatic. When we're not running into that type pattern, we're starting to relax it, we're going to start to see our shadows. And this is very important part of deepening into reality, deepening into our true experience. And so using the example of the type 6, one of the shadows that we're going to start to see is our cowardice, our weakness in running these type patterns. And ouch, we don't want to necessarily see that. These are things that are not necessarily going to be good to see at point 4 for all of us. And these are going to be ways in which I'm going to start to see how I've been weak in the past, how I've done this interrogating process through a place of insecurity. And I've been giving my power away to other people in that process, supplicating to them and asking them for assurance and so on. And these are all ways in which I've actually weakened myself. And don't really want to see that. But now with the help of these spiritual practices, creating a safe container, I can start to see this energy and start to allow these constrictions to loosen. Point 5 in the Waking Up Enneagram, I've entitled Knowing Precisely, contacting and embodying fully all of the rising sensations and energies and investigating and knowing ever more subtle fears as experiences are wisely seen, felt, and understood from beginning to the end. So I'm going to start to see these patterns, and I'm going to start to see and feel myself, my feelings, my true emotions in real time. And we're going to investigate that. We're going to start to see our fears. We're going to start to face our fears at point 5. And this is what we're called to do in this spiritual path, is we're called to be real. If we're angry, we need to bring forward our anger and not be afraid of our anger, or be ashamed of our anger. If we're feeling sad, we need to feel sad. If we're being fearful, we need to own our fear, etc. And we need to have these experiences seen and felt and fully embodied from beginning to end. So usually we're lifting off of these experiences, we're going into our stories, and we're in some way trying to shield ourselves from reality, from our bodies, from our sensations, from what's actually happening. We need to start moving into it and seeing and knowing it precisely. And so as we're starting to see these true stories, the true impact of our behaviors, our type patterns, we may get a sense of feeling guilty. Yes, guilty is charged. I have been doing these things and they have not been helpful. And we need to continue to hold all of this in a non-judgmental space of loving awareness. These patterns, these energies want to be released. They want to be loved. They're part of ourselves. They want to be reintegrated so that energy can flow more freely and we can operate from a stance of free giving and not just constricting and holding ourselves back. All of this is done with some kind of alert mindfulness of our experience. We want to see phenomena from the beginning as it arises, through the middle, all the way through to the end. And that's where wisdom is generated. That's where insight is revealed. And so as we're beginning to feel and see all of our shadows and all of the negative ways in which we've impacted ourselves and others, and we're starting to feel our sensations, we are tempted to once again fall back into our type patterns. This is another way in which we feel the gravitational pull of our type wanting to just start doing itself again. And it just seems so much easier to run back on automatic, run another type pattern and go back to sleep. And so at point 6 in the process Enneagram of waking up, we have our second shock point. We need a second infusion of conscious energy here at the point 6 to keep the process on track, to keep going forward in the process of growth and transformation, no matter how difficult it is. And in fact, at point 6, this shock point is called intentional suffering. And so my definition here of intentional suffering is doing the only responsible or even possible work that we can do, which is to surrender, to let go. We have to stand our ground, stay committed to endure the quaking friction, the conflict between our newly freeing energy and the pull of our old patterns. We need to face the unknown, our existential fears, as our type pattern dissolves. And so point 6 is the point at which we're getting back into reality. Reality as it is. This has been our original aspiration from point 1, is to get in line with reality, to actually wake up, to be a part of the flow of life. And this can create a kind of polarity. There's a kind of friction because the conditionality and the type patterns are pulling on us. We're seeing all those things at 4 and 5 that we don't want to see and feel. And we're being tempted to go back into the type pattern. But if we steadfastly hold our commitment to remaining in that space of loving awareness, we meet that friction between the two, that suffering that's generated with intention and awareness. And that suffering then gets transmuted, it gets transformed, it gets released. And this can be very subtle. Just in the normal process, we have that little bump and then we move on. And sometimes at a point, this builds up where we've let go of the pattern enough where there's a kind of sudden awakening. And this is where the mind can actually be blown in a way. We get some new intuition or some new insight. We get liberated from the pattern, or we could even say it's a kind of grace. And the reason I like the word grace, and it's for some traditions use the word grace, is because it's a feeling of surrendering and letting go. It's not something that we can consciously do. The patterns dissolve themselves in this letting go. The patterns get self-liberated. And so it has this feeling of being graced. And it can come with a kind of insight, intuition, revelation. And this is the way in which the mind gets sort of blown in this process of surrender. I've called the stage at point 7, light of love. This is where we're discerning better and more responsive possibilities for action. These possibilities are found in our formerly latent resource point. And we're using all of that freed up energy, that abundant energy that's coming from the dissolution of the old type patterns in loving awareness. We have all this excess energy to use. Anytime the type patterns are allowed to release themselves, to let go and surrender, There's literally a letting go of constriction in our bodies and in our energetic life force. We can feel that energy flowing again. And that's why the point 7 is a point of excitement for all of us. There's a kind of a newness, a freshness, so an aliveness that's felt with this extra energy that we're suddenly feeling. And with that newfound energy, we have new flexibility. There is a newfound sense of freedom, of options, of possibilities. This is not the pseudo freedom that we thought we were having when we were running our automatic patterns. This is true freedom, or increasing freedom to actually make choices consciously and to be more responsive in the world instead of reactive. And the way that this gets played out is that some of the resources from the high side of our resource point come online. They become available as possibilities. So for the type 6, the high side of my type 3 comes online. Some of these might include confidence and self-trust and trusting others on the surface more. These are all things that the 3 naturally does. Is very surface appeal, concerned with surface, and can be very confident. And for the 6, these have become options that become available. I don't need to interrogate and test people's trust. I can have a kind of untested openness to other people. And through this trust and confidence, I find new ways of acting in the world. Point 8, I've entitled Compassionate Impact. It's allowing an ever fuller autonomous embodiment of the higher qualities of our growth point. And we start to tenderly and even fiercely, compassionately transmit wisdom as a spiritual friend to others. So what's happening here is that we're actually maturing into this new growth. We're actually coming into full being with it as we continue to release these type patterns. And the new responsiveness becomes part of who we are. So we become mature in that response. And this is where autonomy comes in. We become more self-ruling, more free, more truly free to act in the world. And this is where we're also moving to the point where we're going to become mentors for other people. This is the 8 connecting to the 2. We become available to actually transmit the wisdom that we have discerned. We actually have something to offer people at this point. We can actually be of true help and not helping people neurotically in the throes of our conditioning. This is where we really have something to give back to the world. We can make a compassionate impact. And so what coming into autonomy looks like for the type 6 is running the high side of the growth point at type 9, running the high 9 patterns. And so for the 6, in a more autonomous, mature fashion, is going to be discerning and sharply discerning, and yet serene and accepting of everyone. That's just one example of the high growth point patterns of the type 9. And so here my Bitmoji has got his crown on. He's an autonomous ruler, and yet he's quite serene and relaxed is his current mood. So finally, we go to point 9, which is the 3rd shock point, integration and initiation. This is where all the energies come together and they integrate. The holy idea, the virtue, and the pure energy that starts flowing more freely naturally shine with effortless effort. They express appropriate, responsive action for the benefit of everyone, the benefit of all beings. And we can remain in wonder and openness to subtle intuitions, invitations to keep deepening. This is the initiation of a new process. And so at point 9, we have both the integration of everything that's come before, all of the other steps in the process, so that this energy becomes so natural. Now it becomes part of who we are. It's fully integrated to respond to life in this new, more loving, compassionate, responsive way. And yet we still remain at the point 9 in this shock point, open and wondrous and curious and aware of all the ways in which we can continue to grow. We can continue the process. So we continue the process of waking up. It continually spirals to the point where we can be increasingly liberated and free and helpful in the world. And so for my type 6 example, the loyal skeptic is transformed or transmuted into the incisive stabilizer, one who independently creates and supports stability in oneself and other people and in the community by safely, surgically slicing away all delusion, allowing natural goodness to shine forth. So there's still that sword of discernment that's very, very sharp, but it's very safely cutting away everything that's delusory in oneself and in other people, and to create stronger communities to allow our natural goodness to shine. This is truly the gift of an integrated type 6 pattern. This is the way in which the type 6 pattern can be used as a gift to the world by presence, by that which is beyond our conditioning. And so here I've got my Bitmoji, who's he's just, I guess, full of power and energy and rainbows, and the rainbow being the symbol of integrating all of those high qualities in this 9-point of integration. So that's what he's up to. These charts, one for each type, give you a map, an overview of the teachings, putting the personality Enneagram into the process Enneagram. They give you a map of the sleepy automaticity Enneagram, that's the blue on the top, as well as the waking up process Enneagram, which is the bright orangish color down in the bottom row. And so just to give you a quick orientation of these, you'll see that I've got, of course, the name of the personality type pattern at the top. And then the 1 through 9 are the 9 steps in the process Enneagram. And so 1 through 5 here in blue gives you a sense of the type pattern running on automatic in its own right. This is the type 6 pattern, the way that it's structured and the way it's motivated and oriented in the world. I've also included there in the box in the middle the ways in which we each uphold our self-image and we get defensive around it. These are the defense patterns that are common to each type. For the case of the 6, it's projection. And also a little bit of what we're avoiding, which is a kind of the fear along with the 0.5, or what we're missing, the shadows of the 0.4. All of this is the normal type structure in its conditioning. And then as we're moving into a more stress pattern where the primary patterns are beginning to falter, this is the 6 going to the low side of 3, the low side of the resource point for each of the patterns. And then finally devolving into alienation at 0.9, which is the low side of the growth point for 6. And then at the bottom, I've got the waking up. Oh, before I say that, I actually have a quick footnote. These sketches are from Margarita Fernandez. They're in Claudia Naranjo's book on character and neuroses and on the Enneatype patterns. It's a great series of sketches that capture the energy of the different type patterns. And so I want to include those and lift that up. And then in the waking up section, we have a little bit about the holy ideas of the types and some of the practices, or maybe a pointer to some of the practices that can help to integrate the 3 centers. But I haven't really detailed 1 through 5, as some of this will be personal in terms of what are your own aspirations, which are the ones you're working on, what are your teachers and resources at 0.2, and so forth. But when we get to the resources of each type, I've talked about the ways in which the high side of the resources become possibilities for the types here in this latent resources box at the bottom in orange. And then finally, what the type patterns look like when they're fully integrated and shining forth effortlessly. Not that we can mimic this integration, we actually have to go through the work of aware transformation, conscious labor, intentional suffering to get those energies to flow more freely. And so that concludes our discussion of using the process Enneagram as a path of transformation. And so my hope is that you can see now that using the very precise diagnostic of the personality Enneagram teachings in combination with the very precise methodology of the process Enneagram, that which describes a cosmic process of transformation, using them together can bring to life what I'm calling the living Enneagram. And my hope is that this living Enneagram will live through you to help create more ease, to release suffering in your life, to create more of a sense of freedom, and to generate compassion, more compassion for ourselves, for others, and for this world.